quickly realized that English departments across the country no longer teach literature, but teach almost exclusively ideology. Hey guys, welcome back to Pens and Poison after a long hiatus. So I've been absent from YouTube for quite a while now, so I decided it's time to get back to it and just be more regular on here because my writing career has been growing and a lot of people have been resonating with my ideas on Substack and on Instagram, and I definitely want to be a part of the broader conversation surrounding books and culture in as many ways as possible. So today I'd like to kind of reintroduce myself, talk a little bit about what I've been up to over the past few years, and discuss what I have planned for you guys over the next year. And more specifically, I want to get into my story when it comes to my experience in academia and publishing, and talk a little bit about why modern literature is so bad. So for those of you who don't know me, my name's Lisa. I'm a writer and a cultural critic, and I run a Substack called Pens and Poison that's also grown into an Instagram page and a YouTube channel. I'm a lot more active on Instagram and Substack, but honestly, I just miss making long-form videos for you guys, so I'm gonna try to be more active on here as well going forward. So let's get into some story time. I've always wanted to study and write literature for my entire life. And when I was in high school, I had this big life goal to become a writer and to contribute to the literary tradition. To me, literature has always been this long-standing tradition. It's kind of been a dialogue between authors from various centuries. And I've always wanted to do my part to contribute to that, to create this kind of conversation with some of the authors that have really inspired me. So my goal was to make it to an Ivy League university, to study literature, to get my PhD, to go into academia, and then to be able to contribute and kind of give back to the literary tradition that's given so much to me and has genuinely just nourished my soul. And I worked my butt off in high school. I wrote a novel. I was the editor-in-chief of the school's lit mag. I was doing writing internships, and I was doing these independent studies in literature. And I was also reading everything that I could get my hands on. Like, I was reading Dostoevsky in the 10th grade. And all of this work kind of culminated in my acceptance at Columbia University, which was my absolute dream school and where I wanted to go on and study literature for the rest of my life and kind of be in these sorts of academic circles. And when I got to Columbia, I expected so many like-minded lovers of the humanistic tradition, and instead I got a bunch of ideology. I quickly realized that English departments across the country no longer teach literature, but teach almost exclusively ideology. There was a lot of Karl Marx, there was a lot of Judith Butler, there was a lot of Edward Said, these sorts of literary critics in my courses, but we read actually very little literature in the English department, which really started to bother me. And in the classes where we did read literature, everything was so ideologically charged. I'll put a picture here of feedback I got on one of my exams on A Midsummer Night's Dream, where apparently I didn't talk about queer desire, so the professor took a point off. So to me, this all was absolutely ridiculous. And when I was then applying to PhD programs to continue my journey in academia, one of the big things I wrote in my personal statement that I wanted to eradicate all of this sort of ideology from literary study and return to the tradition of humanistic inquiry, which is essentially asking the big questions that make us human. What is love? What is suffering? What is death? How can we overcome the fear of death? Right? These sorts of questions that we all share in common. And to me, that's what literature has always been about. And instead, I got these very hyper-specific particular questions about, Black Lives Matter and what that has to do with literature. And I really wanted to do something about that. I got rejected from 12 PhD programs, enrolled at Columbia to continue my graduate studies, and ended up withdrawing from academia because it was just such a stifling environment. I could not express any of my actual opinions and kind of had to hide behind this ideology. I had a really big kerfuffle with the Columbia University English department when I was writing my thesis. So all of this culminated in my withdrawal from academia because I thought that English departments are really no longer teaching literature. And I was very silent about this issue because it seemed like I was really going against the grain, and everyone in the literary world kind of disagreed with me. Everyone thought that, okay, literature is inherently a political project. Literature is there to help us make societal change and create greater equity or whatnot. And there were all these buzzwords like post-colonialism, class consciousness. And again, to me, that is not why I came to Columbia to study literature. I really wanted to explore some of these big questions. So I withdrew from academia, had no idea what I was doing because I had essentially set up my entire life to be an English professor and then to go on to be a writer. So I had zero conception of what I was doing. My first job out of college was in copywriting because I had, again, no idea what to do with my English degree outside of academia. And I quickly transitioned to college counseling where I sort of used my skills to write and edit essays. Eventually, I created a company, my company Invictus Prep, where I work full-time as as a college counselor and started to make actual money from that, which was really nice and gave me a little bit more freedom to think about what I wanted to do next when it came to the writing world. But the problem was that I felt as if I couldn't really talk about some of the issues that I'd encountered in academia, and I really couldn't go public with my viewpoints because there would be so much backlash. So what I did was I created Pens and Poison to kind of just talk about literature, to just talk about books and culture and all of these things. Very quickly, I attracted this sort of radical leftist crowd that I had seen in academic circles, and I felt that there was just so much that I couldn't say. I focus on primarily the Western tradition. People were calling me racist and xenophobic everywhere, and I said, you know what? I need to actually say what I think and do something about this and help us all return to thinking about literature as an art form, as a way that we can explore the beauty around us rather than voice our grievances. So I wrote this essay. It was kind of a reworking of my grad school personal statement that had gotten me rejected from a bunch of programs, and it's called Leave Literature Alone. I didn't think anyone was going to read it. I had absolutely no platform, no audience, no anything at that time, and I published it to my very brand new Substack. This was kind of the end of 2024, and all of a sudden, I became a hit overnight. There were, I think, 100,000 views on my essay in like 2 days. And people were messaging me right and left. Thank you so much for saying this. This is such a big problem. I can't believe this is going on. No one wants to speak out about it. And I realized that there was this really big gap in the conversation that we're having about literature in terms of how we think about ideology, how we put these sorts of ideas together, and how everything has just become this radical leftist political project in literature and also in the humanities at large. So that is how Pens and Poison was born as a platform. And meanwhile, while I was starting to gain an audience on Substack and on Instagram, I was writing all of these novels on the side because it's always been my dream to, again, contribute to this sort of broader literary discussion, the literary tradition. And I started querying my novels. I started sending them out to literary agents, and I got a lot of responses. I had almost 30 full manuscript requests on the first novel that I sent out, which in my understanding is a lot of interest. And every single one of those 30 agents either rejected me or ghosted me. I did have 2 offers from agents that also then ghosted me after making those offers. And I started to think that there was something wrong in publishing in the same way that there was something wrong in academia. And I started to look into it a little bit more. And what was happening was that the same sorts of ideologues who were coming in from academia were then going into publishing and bringing in all of this kind of radical leftist woke ideology into publishing. I will put a picture here of a response I got from a literary agent complaining that my novel wasn't talking enough about privilege, and I had written a novel about kind of art and beauty and music, and he was basically saying that, oh, I need to talk about privilege more. He literally says here that it's a problem that there are supportive men in the book. So a lot of what is happening in academia then started to seep into publishing. So again, I started to just learn more about what was going on in the publishing world. I started to try to write the sorts of books that literary agents seem to want from me, but the more I wrote, the more manuscript responses I got, and the more rejections I got on those manuscript requests. Again, I started to see that there was something just deeply wrong with the way that publishing was operating. And I started to really talk a lot about publishing on my Substack. And I soon realized that the same thing was going on in publishing. I started to look a little bit more into the publishing world, look into what sorts of books are being published today, what sorts of books are, going through the pipeline. How do I create that perfect first opening chapter that really gets agents hooked? And I started to see that there were all these formulas that agents wanted. You had to, hook your reader right away. There was no room for slow openings. You couldn't write a sentence longer than 15 words. Your book couldn't be longer than a certain length. So there were all these sorts of arbitrary rules that were being informed by some of these ideologies also that were going on in the literary academy. And that was really creating this restrictive publishing world that we're seeing today. And so many of the books being published today, especially in literary fiction, sound the exact same. They're all very ideologically charged. Everyone's always a Marxist. There's always some sort of class discussion. And the big thing with contemporary literature is there's never any sort of moral message. There's never, this is how you should live your life. This is kind of the moral takeaway. And to me, again, that is what literature has been about. You take any great work of literature, for example, Anna Karenina comes to mind, and there is a clear moral message of this is the good life. This is how you should proceed with your own life based on, how these characters are living their lives. And if you look at contemporary literature, it's all nihilistic. There's no message. No one learns anything by the end of the book. There's some development, but you don't reach a kind of resolution or an endpoint. And to me, I think that's a big problem. And I think that is a big contributing factor to this lack of meaning that we all feel today in our society. We feel empty. We feel that, nothing means anything anymore. Why should we do anything? And that is all reflected in the sorts of literature that publishing is pushing out. And the reason they're pushing this out is because their ideas are informed by some of the postmodernism that is being promoted in the literary academy. So I started to talk about all of these things. And again, at first I didn't think that there was an audience for my ideas because everyone in the literary world is so left-leaning. But after I published that essay, Leave Literature Alone, on Substack and got all of these really, really positive messages, I really want to do my part in promoting the message that literature is fundamentally about humanistic inquiry rather than radical leftist politics. And that's what I really want to bring to the table here at Pens and Poison, is asking these big questions through literature, asking, what is beauty? What is art? How can we all come together rather than being torn apart? And I've been doing a lot of writing on Substack about all of this. You can check out my Substack here. And I also post short form videos to Instagram about this issue. And I want to give you guys more thorough rundowns on everything that I just touched on here on YouTube. So I'll be making a lot of videos about what's going on in publishing and in academia and in the contemporary literary world, because we have gotten to the point where contemporary literature is terrible, where literary study is almost impossible now, and we need to do something about this. I also just really like to talk generally about our culture and what's going on. I am a staunch traditionalist, and I think that we've really lost sight of tradition and beauty in so many ways. And I think this seeps into kind of politics and art and just in our day-to-day. So I'll be doing some cultural critique here as well. And lastly, I love to talk about classic literature from the standpoint of humanistic inquiry. So I'll be giving you guys my favorite book recommendations and just talking about books that have really changed how I see the world or have moved me in some profound way. Because at the end of the day, I think that literature should fundamentally help us think about our own lives and the world around us. So if you want to get a better sense of the ideas that I love to tackle, don't forget to check me out on Instagram and Substack and over here on YouTube, where I'll be posting more videos very, very soon. So that's a little bit about me and what I have planned for you guys. So don't forget to subscribe if any of that resonated with you, and follow along on my writing journey if you'd like to learn more about our culture and classic literature and academia and publishing and the humanities at large. And I'll see you guys in the next Pens and Poison video.